Hello and welcome to episode 116 of Radio Gorepress. I'm Sarah. Joining me as always is my lovely co-host Phil.
Hello, 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 hello.
How are you doing, Phil?
Yeah, I'm good. I found out today that I've passed my probation at work, so I've got a full-time job now. So
Woot.
Very exciting.
Definite cause for celebration.
Yeah. And Halloween is fast approaching, which is very exciting.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I am good. How are you doing, Sarah?
I am not too bad. Up and down at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of good things and lots of bad things. I too am very excited about Halloween though. I've been a little bit disappointed by how everything in the UK is a little bit weak sauce with regard to Halloween this year. And I don't know if that's supply issues or perhaps because last year we were all locked indoors, forbidden to leave our homes, that maybe shops just aren't getting the stock this year. But it's been a bit of a disappointment, hasn't
Probably
it?
a number of things. I think it's all of the above, really. You know,
I want my cheap plastic top. I want it. I'm so
Think of the
disappointed.
environment, Sarah.
I know. Do you know what? I am thinking of the environment. I did buy 2 plastic things. I bought a little pumpkin bucket for my pick and mix on Halloween.
Cute.
And because Dan and I are doing a witch-themed movie fest, I bought a big plastic cauldron that we're going to fill with pumpkin.
Amazing.
Popcorn?
Pumpkin.
Not pumpkin.
Flavoured popcorn.
Maybe it should be pumpkin flavoured popcorn.
Pumpcorn.
Pumpcorn. No, that sounds horrendous.
Popkin.
Popkin's way cuter.
It's super cute, isn't it?
Popkin's adorable. Popcorn sounds like some sort of sex crime. I don't like that at all. Oh dear. Start as we mean to go on.
I know, right? Strong start as always.
Yeah. No, otherwise life is not too bad. I am very excited about the film that we're going to cover this week. This week is what last episode was for you. I think this is my equivalent.
Yeah. It's been two films in a row in which we have very, very big thoughts about, very big feelings about these films.
And very deep investment in. I had an absolute blast talking about Cabin in the Woods.
I'm glad.
And I think, and it's sort of, I didn't really know what to expect because it's a film I've seen a lot and it's a film I love and I knew I loved it. But I think talking about it, I mean, this often happens. Talking about it and dissecting it gives me an even deeper appreciation for things sometimes. And I don't know what it is about the rewatchability of that film, but I came away from the podcast wanting to watch it again. I don't know why that always happens.
Yeah, it's good to contextualize your feelings, I think. Because it's one thing to go, I like that. But like you say, it's sitting down.
I like that. It is good.
It's sitting down and mulling over your thoughts and working out why that then justifies and reinforces those feelings, but also, like you say, gives a newfound appreciation because you suddenly realise the work that has gone into a film like that, you know?
Yeah, the labour of love, definitely. So before we get into the episode, and while we're still somewhat on the topic of Halloween, I just wanted to mention quickly that this isn't the first time we're recording this week. This is the second recording. We sat down with Dan and Nicole from the Twin Picks podcast a couple of nights ago, and we'll be guesting on their Halloween episodes, the Picks episode and the main episode. So I'll add links to those when those shows go out. Keep an eye on our social media at Radio Gorepress, and I'll do some shout outs when it happens. But yeah, that was it was a lot of fun.
It was, wasn't it? I really enjoyed myself. I wasn't sure what to expect.
It was a bit different. We've had guests on this show, obviously, but it's very rare that we guest on anybody else's podcast. So it's interesting to see how other people do it.
For sure.
But yeah, I had a good time, so I'm excited. I'm excited to hear how that comes out. And also mortified.
Well,
I'm sure
that's just our default setting for listening back to ourselves.
Ugh, I don't know. I'm kind of over it now.
Yeah, I was about to say, I've become immune, having done so much editing of my own voice now. I'm just that's just how I sound.
Yeah, whatever. Everybody, it's everyone else's problem, really.
Yeah, you're right. Fuck them.
So,
Sarah.
yeah. I just apply that motto to much of life. Fuck them. So, without further ado, we are covering 1992's Candyman. Having said that, obviously felt the need to specify 1992's Candyman, but since we have both seen Nia DaCosta's... Is it Nia DaCosta or Nia Costa?
Nia DaCosta.
DaCosta. I always get it wrong. And I drink a lot of coffee, so...
That's probably why.
Is it Nia Starbucks? Yeah, so we've both seen that one as well, so I'm sure we will be bringing that up. Although, we will try and remain spoiler-free for the new film.
Yes.
However, the 1992 film will be very spoilerific, so now's your warning.
That's fair.
Yeah. Before we delve into it, though, have you got a bit of a synopsis? I'm sure everybody knows, but for the uninitiated, what's this all about, Phil?
I sure do. So, Helen Lyle is a student who decides to write a thesis about local legends and myths. She visits a part of the town where she learns about the legend of the Candyman, a one-armed man who appears when you say his name 5 times in front of a mirror. Of course, Helen doesn't believe all this stuff, but the people of the area are really afraid. When she ignores their warnings and begins her investigation in the places he is rumoured to appear, a series of horrible murders begins. Could the legend be true?
Do you feel like horrible murders is kind of a moot statement?
I mean, yeah.
What would a wholesome murder involve?
Very, very pleasant murders occurring around this area.
Murders, but nice ones. What would that be? Like euthanasia, I guess.
On a scale of like nice to horrible, I think, yeah.
Yeah. At least they've asked for it. Oh dear. Right. Well,
Murder of crows. A murder of crows. That's a pleasant murder.
Oh, clever.
Thank you.
Clever. Good call. Also, a good Incubus album.
I shall take you
on a side note. Yeah, I've been so looking forward to covering this film. For years and years and years, back when we had not Radio Gorepress, back when we had Gorepress.com, the website, I wrote a really lengthy piece about Candyman, and I'm very sad that I no longer have that file saved anywhere. I did look for it. So if I repeat myself, apologies. But I don't know, I've had a very deep love for this film for a very long time. I think this was probably one of the first horror movies that I ever saw.
Okay.
Well, when was the first time you saw this?
Oh, it was definitely more recent than that. It's one I've watched. I think this is a second watch for me.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
It's not. I haven't watched it that much at all. I've got it on DVD, and I think it must have been about. I can probably work it out. Give me a second. It's probably been around 10 years.
Phil.
10, 15 years.
2 watches.
Yeah. Because I remember who bought. I got it on DVD, and thinking about it, I remember who bought it for me. So that helps like contextualize it.
That's insane.
But yeah, it's one of those films that I've been wanting to rewatch for the longest time, but just never kind of. It's always when I think about it, I'm always like, yeah, I should watch that. But then when it comes to actually choosing a movie, I'm never like, oh, Candyman.
Oh, can't relate. I am often like, oh, Candyman. Or should we say Mr. Candyman?
Candyman. Candrew Mandrew, to give him his full name.
Yes. No, he's definitely not called that. Is it Daniel Robitaille, I want to say?
I'll take your word for it.
I think that was the slave
right.
guy's name. Yeah. So
Candyman.
Mr. Candyman. I take issue with that synopsis, actually. He's not one-armed. He's got 2 arms.
One hand. That's fair. I blame...
Well, he's got 2 hands. It's just that one of his hands is a hook. it still has some functionality as a hand.
While we're talking about that, I did read that apparently when Tony Todd was it was kind of like just like prepping the character, they tried out a kind of a mechanical limb of some description that was supposed to have some effect. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but it didn't give him the range of motion he wanted, so that was replaced with a hook. But apparently Tony Todd had requested also if he could wear an eye patch. And so I'm convinced that just Tony Todd was slowly turning Candyman into a pirate.
Can I also have a parrot on my shoulder?
Maybe he's missing a leg, you know. And...
could his leg be wooden? Maybe.
Which he's got that coat. He's got that very kind of like big overcoat.
Don't retcon this. Don't retcon this into Candyman the Pirate.
I would have loved to have seen Candyman the Pirate.
I can't say the same. That'll make me view this very differently. Isn't this set in Chicago? Is that anywhere near the water? I have no idea.
I don't think so, no.
I mean, it's called the Windy City, so that would suggest, perhaps not. Yeah, so my first viewing of this, I was definitely far too young to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
I was maybe 13.
Okay.
Yeah. And there were moments in it that I remember so vividly, such as one of the biggest takeaways for me when I was a kid, and it's kind of part of a wider urban legend as well, I guess, was when Helen kind of goes to Cabrini Green with her friend, climbs through the hole in the wall, and she finds the candy on the floor with the razor blades in.
Mm.
And I don't know why, but when you're a kid and everything is so dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
I remembered that as being like a much bigger plot point.
Okay.
Or like being far more terrifying or gross or something.
Mm.
And it's just funny how you frame things differently and remember things from when you were a child.
Yeah.
And then I watched it. I mean, I've watched it a few times recently, if I'm being honest. And then it always surprises me when it gets to that point. It's like, oh, is that it?
Mm.
I remember that being way worse.
I think, like you say, because it's got that context of being a pre-existing urban legend, particularly if you haven't watched it in a long time, it's very easy for your brain to kind of conflate these two things and remember the film that features a razor blade in candy and the urban legend and then mix the two up and create this hybrid that deals with both. And so you're left with that memory of it rather than...
Where did that urban legend originate? I'd love to know that.
I don't know, actually.
Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did Candyman come first, or did the urban legend come first?
I would, given the film deals with urban legends and the veracity of them, I would expect the urban legend to be to have existed before the film.
That would make sense, for sure. I think it draws on quite a few things, and actually, I will hold my hands up and say, as big of a fan of Clive Barker as I am, I've never actually read the volume of Books of Blood that features the short story.
Okay.
Which I believe is called The Forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to make time to read it before we came to record the show, but I couldn't fit it in, sadly. What I do know is that the original text was set in Liverpool.
Mm.
And obviously Clive Barker's from Liverpool, so that makes perfect sense. Something I didn't know until recently is that the director of Candyman, Bernard Rose, is also a native of Liverpool.
Mm.
So it's even more curious that they shifted proceedings to Chicago. I'm not sorry. It's not a complaint. I would have far rather the film that we got than one littered with Liverpudlian accents. I'm so sorry if you're listening and from Liverpool, but have some self-awareness. I don't know. It would have been interesting. To see it.
I don't think, and don't take my word for it, guys, because this is kind of learned by osmosis rather than having read the source material. But I don't even think there is the racial element to the original story either.
No, there isn't. I believe he was described as being almost yellow in colour.
Yeah. And not in the racist way.
Not in that, no.
Kind of jaundiced, I suppose.
Yeah, just in an abstract. He's a monster.
Yeah.
He's an urban legend. He doesn't need to have a race and actually that fits in really nicely with some of the discussions I've seen going on this week with regard to the Hellraiser reboot. Yeah. Which obviously Clive Barker lost the rights for Hellraiser yonks ago and has only recently, in the last couple of years, got the rights to that back and has now trusted David Bruckner to direct the reboot. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. And I find it so curious that people are upset that there's a trans woman that's going to be playing Pinhead, when in the novel, Pinhead is kind of... They never state what gender Pinhead is, but they describe his voice as being quite feminine almost. But what bothers me is that they're Cenobites. They're not humans. So if gender is a construct, then surely that is even more true. Like, surely if you're a Cenobite, it's even more fluid.
Yeah,
you know?
Oh, for sure. And that's and that's just the vibe that I think fits them. You know, I think they've always dealt with like the conflict of pleasure and pain, and I think this is again, not having seen too much of his work or read too much of his work, but from what I have seen, a lot of what he deals with, Clive Barker deals with, is like liminality, kind of that existing between two states.
Yeah.
You know, with the Cenobites, with kind of, you know, we'll perhaps touch on it a bit later with Candyman. You know, it's exploring that area, that ambiguous area between one thing and another. Yeah,
definitely. It's I mean, that he's a really talented writer, but there's definitely a lot of themes that crop up throughout his work. So I would definitely agree with that call. I think that's really interesting. But yeah, it's funny, the parallels just with the news about Hellraiser this week.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, you know, not only that, he is openly gay as well. So, you know, it's not at all surprising that someone from the LGBT community would be involved in his work.
Quite. And I mean, if you've read any of his work, like, it's not just a little bit gay. Some of it is like very, very gay. Very overtly gay. So he's not a writer that's like... I mean, obviously subtext is a factor and there are allegories and he doesn't always come right out and say it. But he's not a writer that's ever shied away from dealing with those sorts of issues or concealing who he is and the characters he wants to write and cares about. So yeah, it's a strange thing to be angry about, I find.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Nightbreed as well, thinking about it.
Well,
again,
quite,
existing
the whole thing.
In that kind of like halfway point between night and day and like the real world and you know, and what's it called? Midian, that's the one, yeah.
It's where the monsters live. Right, put a pin in that because I am going to very staunchly push for covering Nightbreed at some point, maybe next year.
I'm down.
Well, you've committed now. It's happening. There we go. That's all it takes. Rosie's just going to have to suck it up. So, back to Candyman and the location change, because I want to talk a bit more about that. I think it would have been a very different film if it had been set in the UK.
Yeah, for sure.
Which isn't to say there aren't the same parallels between class and race and the same sort of divides that are present in America. I think a lot of that is echoed over here. But I just feel like tonally it would have been a lot different. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think Candyman's not really a glossy film. It's not very Hollywood. But I feel like a British version of that would have been truly sort of gritty and grimy, and I don't know, part of me feels like it might have been improved in that sense.
Yeah, it would definitely be different. I can't see the... So obviously, we'll, again, probably talk about it a bit later, but Candyman in this film is portrayed, despite him being kind of up there with the echelons of, like, you know, slashers and serial killers, he's portrayed as a very, like, romantic figure, more like a kind of a gothic Dracula, you know, like...
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't imagine that landing quite as much if it was set in Liverpool.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So obviously this is a film with themes of race, racism, class divide at its core. But obviously we've already touched on the fact that Candyman was not written as being black in the source material, or not explicitly so anyway. But I'm really glad that that's a change that they made.
For sure.
I think I have some thoughts.
I would hope so.
And
it'd be a pretty terrible podcast if you didn't.
I'd be a pretty terrible human.
Also that.
I feel like some of this is stuff that's been percolating since watching the recent sequel. And I'm going to call it a sequel because a lot of people have been calling it a remake or a reboot, and it's not. It's a sequel. It's not even a spiritual sequel, as some people have called it. It's a direct sequel.
For sure. Yeah.
I don't think that should be in question. But I think since watching that, it sparked some thought patterns that I perhaps should have thought about before, but hadn't in regard to the original.
Okay.
And I always thought that Candyman was, in some ways it is quite progressive in that, obviously having watched things like horror noir that we talked about when we covered Get Out, a lot of people in the black community were happy about Candyman being black because they had seen sort of Jason, Freddy, these iconic horror movie villains. And there hadn't been a villain of colour. Or not on the same level anyway.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah, for sure.
And so for them, obviously they don't speak for everybody, but for a lot of people, they felt like that was progress because they were getting some sort of representation. Even though he was a villain, it felt like progress. And it's only recently that I've come to see how problematic the original Candyman is.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. I always had somewhat of an issue with it being... I'm going to stop talking about the source material completely and just talk about, frame it in regard to the 1992 film. So, Candyman is black. Great. It's a black story. It's about a slave who was horrifically murdered. Not just murdered, but tortured beforehand. Lynched. Just these horrific acts of racism. All because he fell in love with a white woman. And while I think it's really important to make films that discuss that and that kind of point out how awful white people have historically been to black people, I think what bothers me the most now is that it's a black story that centers a white woman.
Yeah.
And on watching it last night with that in mind, I was actually kind of gutted at how little Candyman is in it.
Okay.
He actually doesn't get a huge amount of screen time.
Do you not think that's the same for...
for every movie villain, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's good that that's the case, but I think it's not uncommon for, particularly for, like you say, villains to be referred to sort of significantly, but actually not to appear within the film, until halfway through or something. And even then to only have like 20 minutes of screen time.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, just kind of watching it with that sort of stuff in mind last night changed my opinion a little bit and made me see it I was always aware it was somewhat problematic, but I think it sort of was amplified watching it with that mindset. Because I think the way Black characters are portrayed is quite iffy as well, because despite the fact that it does sort of centre the struggle of Black people and the discrimination that they face, the characters are not presented in the best way. A lot of them are stereotypes.
Yeah.
Her best friend gets killed off after only being in a handful of scenes. I'm trying to think of the other Black characters that we even get named or that we get to talk to. One of them is a maid, another one is a single mother.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of it does play into stereotypes and not all of them positive. Which screams not having had enough Black input in the creation.
But you say that, but like, again, not to defend it, but I think it's really hard to explore poverty. I mean, I'm not saying, the thing is, Cabrini Green exists, right? The people who are there exist.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how they live their life.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it is a story of kind of poverty and kind of Black people being kept down. And so
I agree with that. I don't think they go about showing it in the best way.
Maybe.
Because I think rather than that message being hammered home and then being presented in a more sympathetic light, it's just like, no, there's this group of criminals that corner her in a bathroom and knock her out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And like, I would say one of the most positive representation is the little boy that she befriends.
Yeah, Jake.
He's very sweet.
One take Jake, apparently.
Oh, really?
He would always nail his lines first time, and so they always refer to him as One Take Jake.
What a fucking gem. He's brilliant. Yeah. He was great, actually.
Yeah, wasn't he? Yeah.
It's not often that I watch anything and I'm impressed by a child actor, but
as we've
he was
touched
great.
on, I think, last mini-sode.
or just impressed by a child. Very seldom happens. But yeah, he's basically one of the only characters that spring to mind that is even somewhat positively represented. And I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't think you're off base in your defense.
Yeah.
I think they probably had the best intentions. But some of the nuance was lost. And that's one of the reasons I loved the recent one, because it was written and directed by Black people.
Of course,
and because the principal characters were shown as being quite affluent and living in the now gentrified version of Cabrini Green. And, she works at galleries. He's a talented artist, albeit still struggling, but it's a much, much, much different representation of race than we get in the original.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're right. Like, just because Cabrini Green, as shown in 1992, existed almost in that state in real life, with kind of that kind of level of poverty and crime, doesn't mean it was necessarily helpful in a wider sense to use that as a vehicle to tell a story, particularly a story that centers, like you say, a white woman. Yeah, it's a tough one. It is a tough one.
It is. Speaking about the white woman, how do you feel about Helen as a character?
As a character, I think she was stupid.
Naive, self-involved.
Yeah, I mean, there was I was reading up on it. During the prep, kind of Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd actually had to basically get plainclothes police escorts throughout the building to keep them safe while they kind of prepped for these roles. And in fact, a lot of the cast were actually gang members from that. Like, a lot of the side cast were actually gang members from that particular kind of building.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's clear that there is that seriousness around that particular location, and for Helen to just kind of bimble and expect everything to be okay was
good
naive.
Lord. Her character makes me angry. She's not the best horror movie heroine.
Well, yeah, no, that's true.
Although she does fit the mold in terms of being like a little bit naive, a bit guileless, very classically beautiful, innocent looking. She is kind of a very traditional horror movie heroine in that sense. But a lot of her actions do make me livid. She's so dumb.
I think particularly from a character who is kind of within the film studying for a thesis.
Oh yeah, she's not dumb. She's a smart cookie on paper. On paper, yeah. So yeah, she's post-grad, is she? Because she's a bit older. She's not student age, is she?
I would expect that. I mean, she's a post-grad, but yeah, the thesis was mentioned.
Yeah. And is it Xander Berkeley? I want to say Xander Berkeley. Yeah,
Let's take your word for it.
He's one of those guys.
Oh yeah.
Like he's in everything, but no one really knows his name. One of those, like Christopher McDonald. Oh God, what a smug bastard.
Xander Berkeley, who is punching well above his weight.
Not only with his wife, with his mistress as well.
Yeah.
What the hell? I mean, I know women are attracted to intelligence, but surely the smarm would offset that.
He was very smarmy.
He was just 95% smarm at all times. I don't know. How did you read him? What was his purpose in the story to you?
I mean,
because initially, like it's kind of one thing to call her naive, but the way she the first time we see him, he's in a lecture hall. He's kind of taking some sort of class in a university. So I guess the inference there is that he perhaps gets a bit too familiar with his students, and because there's a little bit of an age gap between them, and she's a post-grad student, that perhaps they met via rather unethical means. Yeah. And the way he sort of is a bit overly familiar with one of his students while she's there. But the way she approaches him in that instance, kind of, to me at least, I read that as she kind of clocked what was going on.
And asserted her dominance.
Yeah. So she's not completely naive.
Yeah.
And I think she had suspicions, probably because of how her and her husband got together. So it's curious to me that she would then make some of the decisions that she does. Although I guess you could argue that because there's a paranormal factor, perhaps she was like compelled to do the things that she did because it was always you, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Because you kind of asked about his purpose within the film, and I'm thinking about it. It's like, well, actually, if Helen had a loving husband who doted on her, how would that affect? And I was like, well, it probably wouldn't affect anything really. But then I thought about it, and if Candyman is kind of being portrayed in this, like you said, this very kind of quite sensual, hypnotic way, then I think you could argue that perhaps he's exploiting that kind of...
Yeah, he senses a rift.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And she might not have been as ready to follow him and going to buildings that she should not be going into.
But then ultimately it's their story, and if, Candyman can be as hypnotic as he wants to be, so...
That's true.
But...
in terms of Helen being a potentially being. In terms of her being potentially, I hesitate to use the term unreliable narrator, because she's not necessarily narrating it, but we do follow the film
from her perspective
via her. Yeah. She's as close to like a cipher as we get in the movie. When things start going wrong, obviously, I guess the first atrocious thing that happens is she kind of wakes up in the woman's apartment in Cabrini Green, and she is covered in blood. And we don't know what's happened, but she goes into the other room. There is a dog's head on the floor, covered in blood, with a meat cleaver next to it. Was there any point at which you kind of questioned whether or not she'd done it? Was it always clear to you that it was Candyman, that there was this supernatural element?
Because the scene before, she'd interacted with him in some capacity and then blacked out and then woke up. And obviously, you know, it's you could there is a version of a film that maybe deals with like mental health or something, but that's not hinted at all. It's to me, at least, I never picked up on any themes that would indicate that Candyman was kind of a figment, because ultimately, and actually, you know, spoilers at the end, hit her husband, ex-husband, her widower, whatever it's called, says her name 5 times into a mirror and she appears to him. So the supernatural element is real, right?
Yeah, but we don't know that at that point in the film.
No.
And I think basically, I'm asking you because it's only a second watch for you. It's very difficult for me to sort of think back this far to having not been so familiar with the film. But I'm just interested because I was watching it last night, and at the point where she's kind of locked away and sedated and she's in the institution for, I think it's like a month, but she's unaware of it. She feels like no time has passed.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I don't think it's 100% clear that she's not actually crazy.
Okay.
Because even when the psychiatrist is showing her the video where she's kind of strapped to the bed addressing Candyman, obviously there's no one there.
Yeah.
So even at that point, we're like, oh, maybe she is nuts. And then obviously from behind, Candyman kills the psychiatrist. Yeah. As she's still strapped to the chair, so we know she's not done it.
True, yeah. I mean, to me, because Candyman himself was very real to the kind of black community of Cabrini Green. It never occurred to me that he was anything but real. Like, the whole thing is her exploring whether kind of urban legends are real and comes across one that is real, and there just never was anything throughout that kind of cast any doubt on that to me.
Okay.
Like, there was no mention of kind of mental health. The only reason mental health was an issue was because Helen was raving about how Candyman killed these people, or the dog and everything.
What did that dog ever do to anyone?
Right. Bit loud.
Saddest death
dogs
ever.
Are, right.
What makes you think, or why do you think, rather, Candyman killed the people that he did? Was he just trying to isolate her? Obviously, killing her friend makes sense. Trying to isolate her, give her fewer people to talk to and to turn to, so that she has no choice but to kind of submit. But I've always been confused by the death of the dog and the abduction of the baby. I don't know. I was confused by that. I didn't realise... I don't fully understand what purpose that was.
Yeah, I didn't really... I just kind of accepted it as happening. I didn't really give much thought as to why. But, I mean, it's a fair question because, you know, well-written villains have motives.
Right.
And unless they're killing indiscriminately, which, to me, Candyman, he's always described as being very intelligent, very well-read. And so he clearly has a plan. That would make sense to me, at least. And so there must be some logic to his actions.
Yeah. I mean, the abducting the baby kind of makes sense because obviously the baby is used as a tactic to lure her into the middle of the fire.
Yeah.
In the climactic moments. Where he is, because obviously I guess most people's innate instinct is, oh my god, there's a baby crying, there's a baby in this that's about to be lit on fire, I'm going to sacrifice myself and save the child, the small thing. so it stands to reason that that would be a really good way to lure somebody in. But it just seems like a strange method.
I suppose a lot of it is probably wearing down her resolve, because you know, if she's clearly quite a strong-willed character, because she does push her way into Cabrini Green, sensibly or not. And so if all of a sudden she wakes up and a dog's dead and a baby's missing and she's being blamed for it, and then her friend dies, and, you know, so on and so forth, you know, that's got to wear her down mentally. And you would have thought that actually that then makes sort of it easier for Candyman to enact his plans, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And then
it's only really on this viewing that I've thought about
no,
it's
a fair
really.
question. And like I said, you know, it didn't occur to me either to think about it. You know, you could argue that with the doctor, that actually gave her a chance to escape.
I love that scene. Can we just talk about his exit, but first through the window? I love that. It's so cool. I'm not even joking. I think that's executed so well. Just like, whoop, yeets himself backside first. I love it. In terms of horror icons, when you think of horror movies, what do you think of? Obviously, for me, it's The Shining, the Jack Nicholson face through a door, the corridor of blood out of the elevator doors. And then it's stuff like Tony Todd with a mouth full of bumblebees.
Yeah.
Is it like, obviously it's probably not for you if it's only a second watch, but I consider that to be like on the same level.
It's interesting because I don't think Candyman has had quite the same kind of cultural response that something like Shining or something like Texas Chainsaw
or The Exorcist
has.
No, definitely not.
Even though it is up there with them, you know, particularly within the horror community, is definitely up there with them. So yeah, it wouldn't jump to my mind to immediately think of kind of Candyman if you unprompted gave me the kind of like phrase, think of a horror movie, you know. Interesting, yeah. It's
strange, isn't it, how everybody views things differently. I've seen this film so much that so many of the set pieces I think are so brilliantly executed and so memorable. Like, I so distinctly remember from the first watch as a child when Helen is kind of going through the hole in the wall, and you know, when you see that scene from the other side, you see obviously the giant opening is a mouth effectively spray painted on the wall, and I just think that is so visually interesting and iconic. It's iconic.
There are a lot of iconic scenes in this. Don't get me wrong. You know, for all my talk of not having that knowledge, I think that does come from the fact that, like I said, it's not as visible in the wider kind of wider kind of media. But yeah, like the kind of wall of bees that opens that the film. The
aerial shot
of the city, exactly. I was about to say the same thing. You know, the kind of Candyman kissing Helen with a mouthful of bees, you know.
Oh my god, it's giving me chills now thinking about that scene. In terms of the aerial shots, can we just talk quickly? Obviously, spoiler free because we promised it would be, but the opening shots of the new one. When it's kind of very similar, like it definitely has echoes of that. And Dan and I were sat in the cinema and he was like, why is everything back to front? And I was like, it's in a mirror. Do you get it? I thought that was genius. Some of the visual touches.
Interesting.
Did you know? Because even like the production logos at the very start were mirrored.
Okay. I would have noticed that, I'm sure, yes.
Yeah. But that really stuck with me because I thought that was a really neat touch. And I think that's why it's one of the reasons that the new Candyman is so in keeping with the first one.
Yeah, for sure.
I think visually they're both very interesting. Sorry, I've got a cat trying to jump on my lap. Go away.
What's new? But you're right. I think jump on the new one as well. The way they portrayed the stories, stories in like the literal sense, like the stories within the film,
like the legends that get passed down, and
the like portraying it through kind of puppet theatre was.
Oh, I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, definitely, because it really drills down into that like communal storytelling, that kind of like societal storytelling that goes back generations and generations and generations, because this isn't, within the universe, Candyman isn't just a new kind of villain that's popped up. He's been talked about for decades, and
the foundations are laid,
centuries, arguably, and it's a really neat way of portraying that, because it takes you outside the realm of TVs and screens and film, because it shows it in a much more like traditional sense,
and these legends change over time as they're talked about, and people change details here and there, so it is very interesting that they rely on that. And I thought it was just, I'm not going to talk about it because it's not a fair game to spoil it just yet, but I love how they tie it. I love how they tie it into the first one.
Yeah.
There was very little that I didn't love about the new one.
Okay.
It's going to, well, spoiler alert. We'll probably talk about it again when we do our best of 2021 show. I'm sure. There's been little else to talk about. And Malignant sure as shit won't be featuring on my list.
Oh.
Completely.
I'd like to rewatch the remake, speaking of it. Because I had like a vague recollection of how the original played out. And I don't think I appreciated quite how much how authentic they kind of stuck to the themes and the style of the original in the remake, and I think it deserves rewatching it with that added context of having seen the original recently.
I agree, absolutely. And I think the newer one kind of does a better job of centering the Black story and making it quite politically relevant and, as some people have said in a very derogatory manner, woke.
Yeah.
Which I...
rolls eyes for days.
I hugely disagree with because if you don't want films that hold a mirror up to society, then maybe horror isn't for you, is all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Maybe go back to switching your brain off if you're just going to call us all SJWs and trot off to watch, I don't know, Jason X. And I like Jason X. There's a time and a place.
You can't use Jason X as an example of a shitty horror movie that only kind of right wing people watch and then proclaim that you like.
I never said right wing. I didn't say right wing.
That you associate with right wing with kind of like anti SJW mob, shall we say?
Oh, it's trash.
It's fair.
It's a garbage film for garbage people, but I'm a garbage person, so I enjoy it. And that's all I have to say on that. I just want to take a very quick moment to shout out Ted Raimi and his snazzy leather jacket.
Right. My second note is just Ted Raimi followed by about 10 question marks and exclamation marks. Every film I've seen Ted Raimi in, he's been like the nerdy awkward type. And then he was just he's like bad boy. Like, wait, Ted Raimi, bad boy. I'm sorry.
He was just straight up channeling Danny Zuko. It was very strange.
I loved it. It's so funny.
Out of left field.
I know. Can we talk about the music?
Oh, can we? Yes, please. That Philip Glass score.
I loved it so
that's my
much.
That's my ringtone. The Candyman theme is my ringtone. Unsurprisingly. it's one of the few horror movie scores that never fails to give me goosebumps. I think it's not only really evocative and just perfect for the film, it's just a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
The whole score is just gorgeous. Are you a fan as well?
Yeah, I loved it. Like it because obviously you had kind of like it was reworked throughout, you know, maybe with a choir, for example, but the main piano theme was just kind of pitch perfect for this sort of film, I think, because it's quite a tender sound. It's not like harsh strings and grating violins and everything. It's quite tender, which reflects on Candyman's kind of attitude, his the way he's portrayed, this kind of very romantic figure. But it's all a bit sinister sounding and all a bit kind of not childlike per se, but I think
uncomplicated.
I think and actually, to be fair, probably childlike is probably a good word, because it evokes the idea of like urban legends and stuff, which are quite, you know, which are perhaps stories you would hear and become invested in more frequently as a child.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
definitely. On that note, I want to talk more about kind of the romanticism or the romantic element of the story, because I think you were kind of bang on the money at the start of the show when you sort of described how you view Candyman not so much as a villain. Well, I mean, he is a villain. He kills people. That's very bad. That's naughty, Mr. Candyman. But equally, he is this tragic victim. He was made that way. So he's kind of a victim of circumstance, a victim of discrimination, of racism, of hate. And it's kind of turned him into a monster. He wasn't a monster to begin with. And I think that makes him a very sympathetic villain.
For sure.
Far more than any other horror movie villain that I can think of. And I think it's really interesting as well that you kind of compared him, that you called him like Dracula-like, because that's not a comparison that I'd made until you said it, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because,
very like, you know, known for their kind of hypnotic stares and for their very intelligent, charismatic kind of speeches, you know.
Yeah, and I think also like vampirism, that sort of thing, is very romanticized. It's very rare that there's a version of vampires where romance isn't also somehow involved. Because the two kind of go hand in hand. So that analogy really fits for me. And it's not something I'd really thought about. But also there are so many similarities. Like, I think some of the things that I love most about Candyman are that he's so unlike any other horror movie villain in that he's, I want to sort of say, graceful.
No, for sure.
He's not like this lumbering Jason-like man with a machete who never speaks, or like a Freddy who's just loud and wisecracky and cartoonish. He's very understated. He's more like a literary hero.
He's very eloquent, but like you're right, like it's such a like a Victorian concept, that kind of conflict between like love and death, you know. And that's again, like that's kind of what I was getting at with the liminality earlier. It's exploring that as well as exploring kind of poverty and kind of you know, more kind of well-off society. It's exploring that that line between love and death, you know.
Absolutely. And I think I can't imagine a more perfect choice than Tony Todd.
He's got that presence, hasn't he?
He's got such a presence. He's very charismatic. He has a great screen presence. He's very softly spoken in this, which I think fits perfectly. But his voice is also quite gravelly It carries a lot of gravitas. It sounds important, but he sounds intelligent and well-spoken, like you say, and eloquent. And I just think that's kind of the perfect choice for this.
For sure.
Yeah? You
For
feel
sure.
the same way?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's what was I going to say? I've forgotten. It was but it was similar things. It was just about his eloquence and his presence. You know, it's quite it's not actually that frequently seen in, particularly in horror icons, you know, like you say, because, you know, more often
outside
than not,
of vampires.
Yeah.
Interestingly.
Exactly.
But like a lot of his attributes are far more in keeping with a romantic hero than a villain.
And that's exactly what he was. Like he was
a painter, he was an artist.
Yeah, and fell in love. You know, it was a very innocent kind of experience for him. It was it was only the society that deemed it wrong that actually resulted in his death. You know, and you know, I'd be pissed.
Yeah, same. I'd be big mad about that. Not cool. But I think, in addition, I don't know, it's difficult because he is such a contradiction. He is both victim and villain. And that's kind of difficult to reconcile. And I think that's one of the things that makes this film so great, because we are so used to seeing these iconic horror movie villains that are only one way. They're just one thing. And it's very easy to view them as a villain and just go, oh, they're bad. There's no nuance there. They're just, that's the bad man. And in this, there is so much other stuff going on. Obviously, if we didn't have the backstory, if the urban legend element wasn't a part of it, it would be far more black and white. But because of that added context and the nuance it gives, it's just such an interesting character study.
Yeah.
And I think it's played perfectly. Just the kind of intelligence and I don't know. I'm struggling to articulate what it is I love so much.
I think that is kind of Clive Barker all over, though, because obviously as a gay man, he would have been like grown up having been othered himself.
Oh, I'm sure he's no stranger to persecution. Yeah,
having been seen as, in inverted commas, the villain. Like, he understands the nuance that just because someone is seen as bad doesn't mean they are bad. You know, and so he would explore that in his work. And it's the same for Pinhead. Like, the whole point of the Cenobites is that they are beyond kind of human perception and can explore these kind of like I said, the kind of the balance between pain and pleasure without emotion and without bias.
They're just a bunch of chill dudes who like BDSM.
Yeah, basically.
Not wrong with that.
And again, like, it's easy to go, oh, they kill people, they're villains. But actually being these kind of not extraterrestrial, but kind of paranormal, sort of supernatural,
ethereal
entities that exist outside of the realm of human, kind of the human world. They do have that kind of chance to explore things that society deems unnatural or wrong, you know.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about Clive Barker's work, is he's not a coward.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to go to places that a lot of writers wouldn't dare touch.
And it's the same with Nightbreed, right? Nightbreed, they were just chilling out in Midian, minding their own business,
doing their thing. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you know, that boundary between the surface world and Midian is broken, and conflict arises because that kind of like underground versus, you know, above ground.
Yeah.
And love and death, and, you know, reflections and all these things, exploring conflict between two opposing forces. You know, there's a lot of thought, a lot of kind of context that goes into what he kind of explores in his work.
Yeah, I think a lot of his work is, to put it succinctly, kind of a condemnation of small-mindedness.
For sure. And again, that's I'm sure that is something he has grown up being used to, you know, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sad but true, yeah. Hopefully not so much these days, but who can say? People are trash. How do you feel about the climax of this film? I want to get right down to brass tacks, because this is a film that has a lot of build-up. I wouldn't necessarily call it a slow burn. It doesn't feel slow to me.
No.
But there is a lot of world building and story setting before we get to kind of the meat of it. It does follow a lot of the same tropes as like a standard horror movie format. We do get kind of the first kill, in inverted quotes, by way of the story being told and the flashback involving Ted Raimi and his girlfriend, which sort of mirrors like the first cold open kill that you would get in a horror movie. So it does follow a lot of the same beats whilst kind of doing its own thing at the same time. I wonder if that was just sort of a tactical thing to draw in horror audiences and make them feel like this is a thing that you're familiar with.
Maybe.
Before somewhat pulling the rug out, maybe.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense, because like you say, it does. I mean, ultimately, let's be real. Probably, I would argue that Candyman is the protagonist of the movie. He's not necessarily the character we follow.
Okay.
But he is the one who has his intention and enacts his plan and gets what he wants at the end of it all.
Yeah, the film isn't called Helen.
Yeah, like as much as we are positioned with Helen, she is, for the most part, actually a bit of a plaything of Candyman. Like, she has a want to explore urban legends, and she does go about doing so, but half an hour, 20 minutes into the film, she's basically lost most of her free will and is just enacting kind of Candyman's plans, right?
That's true, yeah. It's funny because obviously you described her earlier as like being quite headstrong, and that wasn't the word you used, but like she seems to know what she wants. She's sure of herself. But yeah, Candyman does sort of sweep in and undermine that quite quickly, doesn't he? I think you're right. I think you're right that he is the protagonist, which again is sort of a shame that that he doesn't get more screen time.
Yeah.
A real shame.
And I think that's why that then makes the final scene, to go back to what you were asking about, that ties it all together. Because she goes out in this bonfire, which, by the way, made far more sense in the original book, because of course it's bonfire night.
Yeah.
It's 5th of November. Of course there's going to be a bonfire. Yeah, like she goes out in this kind of like fire. I was going to think of another way of phrasing that, but like fire.
Giant funeral pyre.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just trying to make it sound fancy.
And again, joins Candyman's side as his like undead bride. Like, it again, very, very kind of like Victorian romance, like frolicking about in graveyards, like we spoke about in Della Morte Della More, right?
Yeah, it does have a lot in common with that whole literary Gothic style.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like you're just shy of sort of some billowing sheets and, you know, it's a bit too well lit, maybe.
Yeah, just
for the most part. I think that's actually another thing that kind of sets it apart from most horror films. So much of it takes place in daylight, which is unusual for a film like this.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair, you know, and they don't particularly take any steps to hide Candyman himself.
No.
The first time he's seen properly, he's standing at a distance in that car park.
Yeah.
But actually,
it's not immediately obvious.
Yeah, and just walk straight up to her, and then you see him. you know. And I think that kind of because he isn't necessarily a horrific villain in the same way that other villains might be, because he's this kind of tragic figure, I think, and because he's all about being charismatic and eloquent and having a presence, I think that makes total sense that he would have that presence on screen and have those have the ability to talk and, you know, and actually persuade people, because he's a very persuasive person.
Absolutely. You know? So it's probably time we should think about wrapping up. I'm particularly keen to hear your final thoughts on this, given that it was only a second watch. Did you remember much about it from the first time watch, or did a lot of this seem fresh?
A lot of it was fresh, but, you know, what I remember was probably through talking about things. Like, I knew bees played a part, and I knew he had a hook, and I knew, like, his outfit and stuff. But that's the extent of it, really. It was just, like, the idea of Candyman rather than what actually happens in the film.
I would like to give, just on that note very quickly, I would like to give the costume department and the props special mention for that monstrosity that is his hook. Because my God, is that disgusting.
I don't know if you read it. Apparently they got a blacksmith to make the hook. Then he basically refused to give it to them when he found out he was making props for a horror movie.
Really?
Because he was a staunch Christian.
Oh God, get over yourself. It's just a movie. Yeah. So do you think it has earned its status as a classic horror film?
I think so. Yeah, I think it, as much as we've talked about it being problematic, I think it does deserve its place as being a film that is exploring something new. You know, the actual like combination of that kind of like literary gothic, you know, and like lots of like hazy shots of Helen looking at Candyman. Like it's very evocative of a film of a different era, right?
I thought you were going to say of a Bonnie Tyler music video.
That too. But just transplanted into like today's world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that having watched it now, I would agree. Yeah, it definitely deserves its place.
That makes me happy.
And I think this is probably one up there with, you know, for saying I don't like slashers. This to me is up there with my favourites.
I don't know if I'd even call this a slasher.
You're probably right, but it's the closest subgenre I can probably think of.
Yeah, it does share a lot of commonalities with slashers, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I like it. But just the fact that like Candyman actually has a character and he's not just this like silent behemoth that just walks and kills. Like
for a second, I thought you said bear moth, and I was about to ask what one of those was.
Behemoth, behemoth. I've never been sure how to pronounce that. So
a big hemoth.
A big hemoth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the presence he has. You know, it's refreshing. You know,
that's awesome. That makes me very happy. That would have been a real kicker if we'd got to the end and you'd have been like, "Nah, it was shit."
No, I really liked it. I'm glad I rewatched it.
Cool. I feel like me summing up this is fairly pointless, so all I'm going to say is that I think this is a near perfect film. I think it's one of the horror films I've seen the most times, and I will continue to revisit it. And I'm so excited for the home release of Nia DaCosta's Candyman, so I can double bill them and watch them back to back. I think that would be really interesting.
I think I'd get a new appreciation for the sequel, having now refreshed myself of what the original was like.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think the combination of the source material, the performances, the commitment of the cast, mouthful of bees, man. The commitment.
Tony Todd negotiated an extra $1,000 for every time he got stung.
I think it should have been more than that. But just the score, the visuals, the interesting direction, Bernard Rose did a hell of a job, I think. And yeah, it's one of my favourites. It's in my top 10.
Yeah, understandably.
And I will continue to watch and enjoy, while still recognising that it is somewhat problematic, because the two don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, it's easy to forget how much society has progressed within the last 20 years.
Yeah.
10 years even. And yes, it's in an ideal world, everyone knows right from wrong right from the start, but
it takes a bit of time.
Context changes, and I'm not saying they were right, perhaps, but it was a different time, and it's to compare it with today's values is maybe doing it a disservice.
Maybe, yeah. I think it's fine to go, well, that wasn't okay, but it's still a great film. Otherwise, I think that's fine. I think that's fine. So we did it. We covered Candyman. I'm very happy.
Glad to hear.
On that note, thank you to everybody who's still here. If you made it this far, we appreciate you, and thank you so much for listening. Please do drop us a line on social media. Come and find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Radio Gorepress. We also have a Patreon if you want to support us that way, or a Ko-fi account if you wanted to give us a one-time tip just to say 2 thumbs up. Thanks for the hard work, because, we enjoy this, but it's nice to be...
But give us money.
But it's nice to be bought a coffee every once in a while. Keeps us awake when we're recording late at night. Lord knows that's been needed lately. But yeah, the absolute best way you can support us that costs you nothing is by giving us a review or a like or a subscribe or a share. All of that good stuff. So once again, thank you for listening. We will catch you next time. And in the meantime, stay spooky.
Bye-bye.